Well, an anti-gun politician finally is introducing a law, a bill, sb377 in the state of California, that I somewhat agree with. Now, this bill, if passed into law, which it likely could be, unless police go against it, would prevent law enforcement from being able to purchase off-roster handguns in the state of California. This bill being introduced by Representative Nancy Skinner would change the current state of California's laws. Now, in this press release that they put out, they talked about how law enforcement in the state of California currently has a loophole that allows them to purchase off-roster handguns. Now, it's not just your local beat cops or the sheriff's department. It's also things like the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Horse Racing Board. I believe their law enforcement division was recently allowed to purchase off-roster. She's discussing this as a loophole that allows these illegal or unsafe handguns from being sold. Currently in the state of California, the safe handgun roster, or the not unsafe for sale roster of handguns, is a list of handguns that me or you watching this as a normal pleb, just a filthy little civilian, could purchase. Due to the requirements that my lawsuit, or the lawsuit that I'm involved in, Boland versus Bonta, being put through by the CRPA, we are challenging that. But currently, they are calling this a loophole where law enforcement can currently buy those guns and at a later date decide to sell them. Many law enforcement agencies and departments can purchase but cannot sell. Recently, as of just I believe a couple years ago, the list of agencies that could purchase off-roster handguns in the state of California, I'm sorry for my Italian sign language, that list of departments got increased by a bill that was pushed through unanimously. It seemed to have absolutely no opposition. We did not see Nancy Skinner, from my recollection, opposing law enforcement agencies being added to the list, but now they're calling it a loophole. We need to discuss first what a loophole actually is. A loophole, when you call something a loophole, is typically an oversight of the law. Let's say they say they're banning something, but we figure out a way to work around it. That is what would typically be considered a loophole. Basically something that isn't expressly illegal, but might go against the spirit of the law. This is very different. Having it written into the penal code that certain people are exempt from certain laws is not a loophole. They are explicitly allowed to purchase these firearms. They're talking about how they are fighting this scourge of gun violence in the state of California and nationwide, and how these law enforcement agencies are contributing to that somehow. Because apparently, legally purchasing a firearm and then selling it legally, where the buyer of the gun goes through a background check, does all the paperwork, waits 10 days, that's a loophole, according to them. This bill would prevent law enforcement from being able to purchase for their own personal use or duty use off-roster guns. It would also make police no longer exempt from the 10-day waiting period. Got to talk about that for a moment too. Currently in the state of California, if you're a law enforcement officer of some sort, you can get a letter from your police chief or from your chief head of your department that would allow you to purchase a specific firearm that they allow to not have to go through the 10-day wait. Usually what happens is a law enforcement officer will say, hey chief, I need a letter so I can get this Glock 48, for example, for off-duty carry or on-duty carry, and I would like to not have to wait the 10 days. They write a letter, they go to the gun store, they fill out the background check, and they just get to walk out with it that day. That is expressly written into the law. Again, not a loophole, an explicitly legal act for them to do. They're calling it a loophole. This bill would also prevent that from happening. So if this bill goes through, law enforcement in the state of California would not be able to purchase off-roster for their own personal use and would no longer be able to get exempted from the 10-day wait. Like us, normal, average, pleb, filthy peasants, us filthy civilians. I think that this is a fair way to have the laws written, because currently all of the gun control in the state of California has been previously supported by law enforcement agencies across the state. I know that many individual law enforcement officers are not fond of these laws. I'm very aware of that. I would say most of them probably don't understand why you can't just buy a Gen 5 Glock. But since they are allowed to purchase them for themselves, they usually support these laws as a whole department. Maybe not as individuals, but the department heads, the police unions typically back gun control laws because their officers are exempt. So it's in their best interest to be more capable and more well-equipped than the civilian populace. Kind of goes against what the Second Amendment acknowledges. I'm trying to be very specific with that language because the Second Amendment does not grant you a right. The Second Amendment acknowledges that the government shall not infringe upon the right that you have inherently by being alive and being a free citizen. This law, I think, could pass unless police unions go against it. And if they go against this, but support all of the other gun control, it would only further solidify my position that many others share, that law enforcement departments as a whole and law enforcement unions are pro-gun control for you as long as they get their little carve-out, as long as they can still buy their guns. This bill, they say, would not prevent police departments from purchasing these firearms that they are acknowledging here are unsafe. I'm pointing down at my phone because that's where the article is, but if you see that, I'm not pointing at my feet. They are acknowledging in this public release that these firearms are unsafe handguns, and they want those off the streets, except for when law enforcement agencies purchase them for use of the performance of their duties. Because apparently, this is their thinking, LAPD being issued FN 509s, which are off-roster unsafe handguns, that's fine. But if that law enforcement agent wanted to purchase maybe a second one to practice with more and put more wear and tear on, that's where they draw the line of what is unsafe and dangerous and could not have that on the streets. They also acknowledge the black market, or the gray market, I guess is really what you could call it, where law enforcement departments or law enforcement officers in the state of California currently can buy off roster and then decide they don't like it anymore and sell it. Many law enforcement officers in the state of California have gotten in a little bit of trouble because they decided to purchase 10, 20, 30, 100 off-roster handguns and then sell them, which would make them in the business of selling firearms, which would mean that they would need a federal firearms license, an FFL, in order to conduct business of a firearms seller. It's very interesting for me that they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want law enforcement officers to still have these firearms that they are saying are unsafe. They're saying they're unsafe. I don't believe these firearms are unsafe, which is why I am a named plaintiff in the Boland v. BAN CA lawsuit, which we just had a lawsuit hearing on. Hopefully we get a preliminary injunction on that so that some stuff can happen. Bare minimum, we think we can get rid of microstamping so that in the meantime, potentially firearms can get added to the roster. We will see how that all plays out, but if you want to support, donate to the CRPA. They're doing good work, good people at Michelle & Associates that are doing a whole lot of work. A lot of people give me credit for that lawsuit. It ain't me. I'm just a named plaintiff. I have a vested interest in having my right to keep and bear arms with the most suitable firearms currently available on the market. But we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, and the CRPA is doing good work. The state is trying to have their cake and eat it too. They're trying to say that these guns are unsafe and police should not be able to buy them. But at the same time, they're saying police should also be able to use these guns to perform their duties because they need to have these firearms that are unsafe. That's their words, not mine. They are calling them unsafe. I don't believe they're unsafe. In fact, I think the improvements to the Generation 5 Glocks, including the internal safeties, are an improvement and make the firearm more safe than the Generation 3, a design that's probably 20 years old at this point. We are using firearms and are limited to firearms that have been around longer than I have. That's weird, right? That's wrong. When law enforcement or any other state in the union can use the quintessential home defense or quintessential self-defense firearm, the handgun, we have to be stuck with designs that are aging out? Seems odd. These guns are not unsafe. They're calling them unsafe. This bill would also go into effect in a way that would prevent law enforcement agencies from dealing with shady FFLs. One of the links that they link to talks about LC action, which if you are a law enforcement in the state of California in the central area of San Jose, which is kind of in the center of California, you probably are familiar with LC action. They called LC action a shady vendor because they had over 40, I believe, federal infractions. Now, to get an idea of what could be included in that, it's things as simple as improperly marking off or correcting some forms. There are specific rules that you're supposed to follow when you make a correction to a form. There's specific rules you're supposed to follow when it comes to having signage, talking about the laws of what's legal and what's not legal. They tried to present it as these stores are engaging in the business of allowing and encouraging straw purchases. If that was really the problem, they would have explicitly stated that. I have a feeling that the 40+ infractions that they had were simple documentation errors. And the problem is, well, I worked in a gun store. I've spoken with a lot of people that work in gun stores. Things get a little confusing, to say the least. The state and the feds both have auditors that go around to different agencies or different FFLs and say, hey, you can do this, you can't do that, and you have to kind of rely on what your auditor is telling you you can or cannot do. Even if they're saying you can't use these documents, when you can, per the law, you kind of have to follow what your auditor says, because your auditor can screw you either by telling you to do something illegal or telling you not to do something legal, which sucks. Now, if you've worked in a gun store or if you own an FFL, chime down with your comments down below of weird things your auditor has said, because I'm sure there are plenty of stories of your auditors who are supposed to be looking at your books telling you things that are not legal or telling you things are illegal when they aren't. I'd love to hear more stories that you guys might have. Let me know what you think about the roster as a whole. Let me know what you think about this bill, because it would put cops at the same playing field as us plebs. Do you think this bill is going to pass? I think this bill would likely have a lot of support from the anti-gun, the 66% majority that runs this state when it comes to the state representation at the Senate and State Assembly, but we will see how this plays out. I think the only way that this bill does not pass is if police unions go against it. And I think they will. Because for the first time in California, gun control is going to negatively impact law enforcement. It's going to put them on the same playing field, and they don't like that. Let me know what you guys think down below. You guys know the drill. Have fun, be safe, stay dangerous. Peace.